So back in 2015, there was this really brilliant, visionary CEO of a highly successful tech startup. And he had to step down unexpectedly due to health reasons.
Right.
And within 48 hours, $2 billion in market value just completely vanished. And the crazy part is the company's core business model was totally sound.
Oh, absolutely. The product line was untouched.
Yeah, and their cash reserves were incredibly healthy. So, you have to ask what actually happened? Why did the floor just fall out from under them?
Well, because when you actually pulled back the curtain, the reality was terrifying.
Yeah, they hadn't just lost a leader, right? They had literally forgotten how to make a decision.
Exactly. The entire organizational architecture was entirely dependent on one human brain to process every major choice.
It's just wild.
It is, but it's a remarkably common phenomenon. And I mean, it really exposes a fundamental flaw in how we perceive organizational strength. We tend to look at companies or military units the way we look at, like, architecture.
Oh, I like that comparison.
Yeah, so when you walk into a grand, beautifully designed building, your eyes are immediately drawn to the centerpiece. The sweeping mahogany staircase or the massive crystal chandelier.
Right, the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, the shiny stuff.
Exactly. The features that catch the light and seem to define the whole character of the space.
And if you're just a casual observer, you might look at that massive, brilliant chandelier and think, wow, that is the thing holding this whole room together.
Right. But you ask a structural engineer, and they will tell you a very different story. Because
Okay.
you can completely remove that chandelier.
The rain goes dark.
It goes dark, sure.
Yeah.
It loses its undeniable charm, and it certainly feels a lot emptier, but the building stands perfectly kind.
Yeah.
However, if you remove a single, ugly, concrete, load-bearing column that's just hidden away inside the drywall,
The ceiling literally caves in.
which is exactly the mistake we consistently make when evaluating human organizations. We completely confuse the highly visible, charismatic centerpieces with the actual structural load-bearing columns.
We assume the person catching all the light is the reason the building is standing.
Holy.
Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're joining us today, you are exactly who we built this for, the learner.
That's right.
Whether you're a corporate executive prepping for a massive boardroom transition, or a military officer staring down your next operational deployment, or just, someone who is insanely curious about how power actually functions behind closed doors, we're thrilled you're here.
It's an essential topic.
Today's mission is an absolute powerhouse. We are unpacking this incredibly dense, fascinating manual called The Instrument of Power by Raposh Duralari.
It really is a definitive, unapologetic guide to building systems that outlast their leaders.
Exactly. And the central question we're tackling today, which is basically the ultimate test of leadership, is simply this: remove the leader, what remains?
And that truly is the crucible question for anyone holding a position of authority, because power that merely feels strong in the moment is fundamentally different from power that is actually built to last.
Right, it's an illusion.
It is. Charisma, immense personal authority, sheer force of will. They create this brilliant, intoxicating illusion of durability. But structurally, it often masks incredibly deep, dangerous operational dependencies.
So we are entirely bypassing the theoretical today. We are getting straight into the structural mechanics. We're extracting actionable, concrete steps for both military and corporate leaders so you can test your internal structural stability.
Yeah, we'll be diving deep into succession audits, authority mapping, executing practical stress test scenarios, and outlining a comprehensive 90-day transition plan.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even begin to spot that illusion of durability? Like, how does an organization fall into the trap of confusing the chandelier for the column?
Well, we have to start by analyzing what Durolari terms the dependency curve. It's this highly predictable four-stage pattern that illustrates how concentrated authority evolves over time and ultimately how it fails.
Okay, so what's stage one?
The journey always begins with stage one, which is consolidation. This is basically the honeymoon phase. A strong, capable leader steps in, cuts through the existing noise, clarifies the strategic direction, and momentum rapidly builds.
And the organization starts performing exceptionally well.
Right, and naturally, everyone attributes that sudden success entirely to the new leader.
Which honestly feels amazing if you're on that team. I mean, everyone is high-fiving in the hallways, the stock price is climbing, or your unit is crushing its operational readiness metrics. You just feel unstoppable.
Exactly. The momentum is very real, but it leads directly into stage two, which is optimization.
Okay, and this is where the trouble
This
starts.
is where the structural shift begins.
Mm.
The entire organizational system subtly begins to adapt to that specific leader's unique strengths, their communication style, their personal preferences.
So they're optimizing for the person, not the mission.
Right. On paper, efficiency peaks. The gears are turning smoothly, but beneath the surface, the team is learning to anticipate what the boss wants, rather than exercising their own independent, critical judgment.
So instead of a junior executive looking at a massive supply chain issue and thinking, what is the objectively best, most robust solution to this problem? They start thinking, what solution will the CEO most likely approve by 5:00 p.m. today?
Precisely. The mental calculus shifts from solving the problem to solving the leader, which brings us to the silent killer of organizational longevity.
Stage 3.
Stage 3, compression. In this stage, independent decision-making begins to systematically decline across the board. Every approval, every new initiative, every minor deviation from the norm just centralizes at the very top.
Bottleneck.
Yeah, the dependency on that single leader deepens profoundly. And the terrifying part of compression is that, from the outside, it looks like tight, highly disciplined, flawless execution.
Because there are no messy disagreements. The leader says, go left, and the entire machine snaps to the left instantly. I mean, it looks like the ultimate high-performance team.
But internally, the organization has completely lost its ability to think for itself. The muscle memory for independent problem solving has just atrophied. The leader is making all the calls, which means the leader has become the single point of failure.
And then the chandelier is removed.
Stage 4, exposure. The leader leaves for another opportunity, transfers to a new command, or is unexpectedly incapacitated, and the transition instantly reveals the catastrophic failure of the architecture.
Everything just stops.
The cost of every single previous decision to personalize authority rather than institutionalize it becomes devastatingly visible all at once. The organization freezes.
Now, the source material draws some incredible parallels here between the corporate sector and the military. Let's look at the corporate side first, because Durolari explicitly outlines this thing called the founder compression effect. We've seen this play out so vividly in recent years with companies like WeWork or Twitter. You have a brilliant, highly charismatic founder who essentially wills the company into existence.
Right, their DNAs and everything.
Exactly. Because of that early history, all true authority remains hyper-concentrated in their mind long after the company has scaled into a massive enterprise.
And in those specific corporate examples, we witnessed billions of dollars in market value wiped out almost overnight when the founder departed or the leadership structure was radically altered.
Because everyone else was just waiting for orders.
Exactly. The critical takeaway isn't necessarily that the underlying business models were entirely flawed from the start. The issue was that the organizations were heavily optimized for total dependence on a single mind, not for structural durability.
Right.
When that central processing node was removed, the company literally lacked the wiring to route decisions anywhere else.
Now, contrast that corporate environment with the military, which fundamentally operates on a completely different rhythm. I mean, the military has a built-in constant rotation of leadership.
Yes, it's designed that way.
The sources highlight the Air Force's 24-month PCS rotations, that's permanent change of station, and the Army's 12 to 18-month battalion command tours. So if we apply the dependency curve to that reality, the military is essentially guaranteeing a stage 4 exposure event every 18 to 24 months.
Which is staggering. Durolari refers to this specific military phenomenon as the 24-month knowledge cliff. It's a massive structural challenge.
I can imagine.
Every 2 years, the formal institutional memory, the nuanced understanding of the local operational environment, the informal back-channel relationships, it all just packs up and walks out the door to a new duty station.
I mean, how does the military even function if the CEO of the battalion changes every year and a half? Like, that seems impossible.
Well, it survives this cliff primarily by relying on informal structural columns, specifically the NCO Corps, the non-commissioned officers.
Yeah, okay.
The senior NCOs who stay in place at an installation or within a unit for many years become the hidden load-bearing columns. They hold the institutional knowledge.
Yeah, it makes sense.
But the manual points out a critical vulnerability here. Relying on a specific senior NCO's personal memory and experience rather than a documented, objective architecture is still a profound risk, even if that NCO is the most outstanding operator in the military. Informal systems are just inherently fragile systems.
Wow. The historical context the source brings in to illustrate this is absolutely fascinating. Durolari compares Napoleon's command structure to the British Royal Navy post-Trafalgar.
Oh, this is a great example.
Yeah, so Napoleon was an undisputed tactical genius. He could read a battlefield better than anyone alive. But his power was entirely, completely concentrated. Every strategic pivot required his direct input.
And when his empire scaled beyond the physical limits of where he could ride his horse in a single day, that centralized genius became a massive, fatal fragility.
He couldn't be everywhere.
He couldn't. He simply couldn't be everywhere at once, and his subordinate commanders were terrified of making independent decisions without his explicit orders. They were deeply trapped in Stage 3 compression.
Whereas the Royal Navy, even after losing Admiral Nelson, who was arguably their most famous, charismatic, and brilliant leader right in the middle of the Battle of Trafalgar, they held perfectly firm. The command didn't shatter when Nelson fell.
They held firm because the Royal Navy's authority was deeply distributed through ingrained doctrine. They had built an institution, a set of operational architectures that did not require a genius at the helm to function brilliantly.
So they already knew what to do.
Right. Nelson's subordinates didn't need to wait for orders because the doctrine explicitly told them what their decision-making parameters were in his absence.
So to put this in perspective, charismatic, centralized leadership is basically like organizational sugar.
Organizational sugar, I like that.
Yeah, it gives you an incredible short-term burst of speed, momentum, and energy. You feel completely unstoppable. But over time, if that is all you're feeding the system, it rots the structural teeth of the company.
It's an extremely apt analogy. Concentrated power undoubtedly helps organizations act incredibly fast. In a sudden, unexpected crisis, that speed is intoxicating and highly effective. But distributed power is what helps an organization last.
An organization built on sugar will collapse the moment the diet changes.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this inherent fragility is exactly why leaders desperately need actionable, objective diagnostic tools.
You can't just guess.
No, you cannot fix a rotting structural foundation if you are still mesmerized by the sugar rush of this quarter's performance metrics. You need to know exactly how vulnerable your organization is the very second you step out of the room.
Which leads us perfectly into the first major actionable tool from Durolari's manual. If personal charisma is actually a hidden liability and we need to know exactly where we stand on that dependency curve, we have to run a diagnostic.
We do.
The manual outlines something called the 90-minute succession audit. And for you listening right now, this isn't some massive 6-month consulting engagement. This is a forensic tool you could deploy with your leadership team this afternoon.
It is formally termed the 5-step succession sprint, and its entire purpose is to uncover those hidden operational vulnerabilities before a transition or a sudden departure forces them into the light. It consists of 5 brutal, uncomfortably honest questions.
Let's actually walk through these questions because they force a level of self-awareness most leadership teams actively avoid. The first question in the sprint is strategic direction documented or personality-driven?
This cuts right to the core of daily operations. If you, as the leader, completely vanish today, is there a written, rigorously debated, and universally understood doctrine driving the next 6 months of the organization's actions?
Or is it just in the boss's head?
Exactly. Or is the strategy basically whatever the boss says it is on any given Tuesday morning? If the strategic direction relies entirely on your verbal course corrections in weekly meetings, you do not have an architecture. You have a personality cult.
Wow, that is a harsh reality check. Okay, question 2. Can senior leadership make independent decisions? And the manual makes it clear that by independent, it doesn't just mean they have the authority on paper. It means, practically, do they make decisions without constantly checking the temperature of the room to see what the boss thinks first?
A fantastic way to test this in real time is to observe your own leadership meetings. When a complex, high-stakes problem is placed on the table, do your vice presidents or your subordinate commanders immediately offer conflicting, well-reasoned solutions?
Or do they wait?
Right. Or do they all subtly pause, waiting for you to give a hint of your preference before they safely align their opinions with yours? If they are waiting for your signal, they are deeply compressed. They're not making independent decisions. They are merely echoing your preferences.
That's a great test.
Okay.
Okay, question 3 of the audit. Are external relationships institutional or personal? This one feels especially relevant for sales-driven organizations or, military civil affairs units.
Absolutely.
If your absolute best, most reliable supplier or your highest revenue client only takes your calls because they happen to really like you have a massive structural vulnerability.
Completely. If that client relationship is based on the fact that you both play golf together on weekends, that relationship will likely evaporate the day you retire.
Yeah.
An institutional relationship is one that is bound by contracts, shared integrated systems, and multi-layered organizational ties that easily survive your departure. If you hold all relationship capital personally, you are a single point of failure for the organization's external viability.
Then we hit question 4, which might be the most common trap of all. Does authority flow through process or proximity? Meaning, does the person with the most actual power to get things done have it because of their documented formal role, or simply because their desk happens to be 10 feet from the CEO's office?
We see this constantly. The chief of staff or the executive assistant who functionally wields more power than a vice president simply because they control access to the leader's calendar and have the leader's ear between meetings.
Right.
Proximity power is incredibly efficient in the short term, but it completely undermines the formal architecture. When the leader leaves, the proximity power vanishes instantly, leaving a massive vacuum because the formal process was never actually used.
It was all a workaround. Finally, question 5 is successor development active and named. And the manual specifies this cannot be a vague hallway conversation where you say, I think Sarah might be really good at my job one day.
It must be a documented, active, resourced pipeline. Sarah needs to be explicitly named as a potential successor. She needs to know it. And she needs to be intentionally placed into high-stress scenarios to develop the specific capabilities required for the role.
So if the answer to any of these 5 questions is uncertain or reliant on your continued presence, you have found a major structural gap.
You absolutely have.
So we run the 90-minute audit with the team. It gets uncomfortable, but we find our structural gaps. But Durolari argues that knowing your vulnerabilities isn't enough. You also have to identify the actual beating heart of the system, what he calls the core lever.
Yes, the core lever. It is the single operational capability that, if fundamentally disrupted, destabilizes the entire organizational structure. It is the absolute engine.
Give me some examples.
Well, in a corporate environment, depending on the industry, the core lever might be capital flow, proprietary data integration, or global supply chain logistics. In a military context, it's almost always logistics, or the C2 command and control communications nodes.
The central nervous system.
Right. It is the one thing that cannot stop under any circumstances or the entire mission fails.
And the manual is incredibly strict about how this core lever must be managed. It insists the core lever must be governed by something called dual control.
Dual control is a non-negotiable structural safeguard. It means you must have operational management running the core lever on a daily high-tempo basis while running completely parallel with independent structural oversight.
So separation of powers?
Exactly. The people who are actively pushing the buttons cannot be the same people who are auditing whether the buttons are being pushed safely.
So practically speaking, you need a brief objective checklist to evaluate if this core lever is truly governed independently. Like, does the software engineering team run the platform day to day while a completely separate, fully independent risk committee monitors the access protocols?
That's a perfect example. Or if the operational commander is designing the mission parameters, is an independent staff section providing the red team planning review. If the exact same person executes the mission and oversees the risk of the mission, your organization is balancing on a knife's edge.
Okay, I track the logic of dual control, but I can already hear the frustration of a listener trying to implement this. How do we know we've actually found the true core lever and not just the loudest, most politically connected, most expensive department in the organization?
Oh, the ego trap.
Right. I feel like if you ask any department head, they will swear they are the core lever. The marketing VP thinks the company dies without them. The IT director thinks they are the core lever. How do you cut through the ego?
It is a pervasive trap. Every department believes they are the center of gravity. To cut through that internal noise and political posturing, Durolari provides a highly forensic tool called the BLADE Quarterly Review.
BLADE.
Yes, BLADE is an acronym for an after-action review template. It's designed specifically to strip away ego, find structural gaps, and verify what actually drove success or failure.
Let's apply BLADE to a realistic scenario so we can see how the mechanics actually work. Let's say we are a tech company. We just launched a massive new software product last quarter, and the launch completely failed to hit its revenue targets. We're sitting in the boardroom for the quarterly review. Walk me through it.
All right. The first step is B, which stands for benchmark. You don't start with opinions. You start by benchmarking what actually factually happened. You lay out the initial projections versus the hard reality.
Okay.
So we projected 50,000 new users. We acquired 12,000. That is the benchmark.
And next is L for labor.
Here you ask the critical diagnostic question. What did we believe the core lever was going into this launch versus what did reality actually reveal?
Interesting.
Going into the launch, the leadership team believed the core lever was our aggressive marketing spend. But when we look at the failure, we realize the marketing worked, people clicked the ads. But reality revealed the actual core lever was server capacity.
Oh.
The servers crashed during onboarding, and users abandoned the platform.
Well, we misidentified our lever. Wow, okay. A is alignment.
Where did our organizational assumptions actually match reality, and where were we completely blind? So we were aligned on our assumption about customer demand. We were totally blind to the technical debt in our engineering department.
D's is for data.
What new specific signals appeared during this event about our hidden dependencies? Did we discover that the entire server infrastructure relies on one specific senior engineer who happens to be the only person who understands the legacy code?
Oh, man, that happens all the time.
It does. If the server stayed down for 8 hours because that one engineer was on a flight to Tokyo, that is crucial structural data.
And finally, E for experiment.
What specific measurable test happens in the next 90 days to address the gap we just found? We aren't just going to complain about it.
And we have to fix it.
Right. The experiment might be, we are going to intentionally take that senior engineer completely offline for 48 hours next month, and the junior engineering team must successfully run a server migration without them. Running the Blade protocol transforms a standard, boring compliance review into a relentless, objective hunt for structural truth.
Once you have run the succession sprint and you have ruthlessly used Blade to find your actual core lever, the next step is formalization. You have to write down exactly who's allowed to touch that lever. You have to map the authority.
Yes.
And the manual draws a very sharp, crucial distinction here between having a fancy title and wielding actual decision power.
This distinction is where most organizations fail in their transition planning.
Okay.
Almost every organization relies on an organizational chart, but an org chart merely shows reporting lines. It shows hierarchy. It shows who has to approve your vacation time.
Right.
An authority map, however, shows decision rights.
So an org chart tells me who I have to salute or call sir or ma'am, but the authority map tells me who actually has the power to sign the $1 million check, launch the missile, or pull the product from the shelves.
Exactly. And to effectively distinguish formal rank from actual decision-making authority, the manual provides 3 specific metrics you have to measure. First, titles versus action.
Okay.
Org charts display ranks and impressive titles. Authority maps define decision rights by specific operational categories and exact financial thresholds.
Give me an example.
Well, Director of Global Supply Chain is a title on an org chart. Authorized to reroute logistical shipments up to $500,000 without requiring secondary executive approval is an action on an authority map.
Second, metric reporting versus absence. The org chart shows that the VP of Sales reports to the CEO, but the authority map dictates exactly who is legally and operationally authorized to act in the CEO's absence.
And crucially, it documents succession by role, not by name.
So it's never, if John is sick, Mary makes the call.
Right, it must be. If the chief executive officer is unreachable for more than 4 hours, the chief operating officer assumes full financial authorization up to $50 million.
That's so much clearer. And the third metric is structure versus escalation. Org charts show unit structure, the neat little boxes connected by lines. Authority maps define explicit escalation pathways with predefined objective triggers.
So if a major PR crisis hits at 2:00 a.m. on a Sunday, you don't waste time trying to guess who to wake up based on who is highest in the org chart. You follow the map's explicit trigger path, which tells you exactly who owns the crisis response at that specific hour.
To make this hyper-practical, let's actually draft a sample authority map template right now for a mid-level command role. Think of an Army company commander or a corporate regional director. If I am handing this person their authority map on day 1, what specific fields must be on this piece of paper?
There are 4 absolute must-haves for that template. First, the primary decision node definition. What is the exact, unvarnished scope of this role's power? Second, and most importantly, the explicit boundaries of authority. What are the specific things this director or commander is fully authorized to do without asking permission from anyone above them? Defining these boundaries is vital for operational speed.
Right. Third point.
Third, the emergency authority scope. When operations go completely off the rails, what temporary extra powers are granted to this node and what remain hard limits,
Yeah, on the fourth.
redundancy pathways. If this commander's communications are jammed or they are in the hospital, who specifically, by role, steps into the node and assumes the authority instantly?
Here's where it gets really interesting. I can hear the pushback from aggressive, fast-moving leaders right now. Isn't an authority map essentially just a bureaucratic straitjacket?
I hear that all the time.
I mean, if I have an elite team and they have to pull out a matrix and consult a flowchart every single time they need to make a decision, haven't we just replaced a fast, decisive, charismatic leader with a slow, paper-pushing committee?
It is a completely valid concern, especially for organizations that pride themselves on agility. But that perspective gets the mechanics of speed entirely backward.
How so?
Well, well-mapped authority does not slow you down. It actually accelerates speed because it systematically removes ambiguity. Think about the friction in an unmapped system. Junior leaders hesitate. They second-guess their instincts.
Yeah, they write an email, delete it, rewrite it.
Exactly. They draft an email to the boss to check if an action is okay. They delete it, they rewrite it, they send it, and then they wait 24 hours for a reply.
Which kills momentum.
Right. But in a mapped system, the junior leader immediately knows their boundaries. If the necessary decision falls within their defined boundary, they execute it immediately. No emails, no waiting, no permission seeking. Absolute clarity is what creates true operational speed.
Okay, I see the mechanics of that. Clarity equals speed. If I know I have a $50,000 budget to fix a problem without asking, I just fix it. But that raises a massive secondary question. If we are empowering all these people on the authority map to run fast and make autonomous decisions, what happens when someone makes a terrible call? How do enduring organizations catch critical errors and correct themselves without slamming on the brakes and slowing the whole machine down?
That tension brings us to one of the most counterintuitive yet brilliant concepts in Durolari's manual, the discipline of friction. The manual argues deeply that intentionally embedded redundancy, structured dissent, and independent oversight are the mechanisms that actually protect your strength.
Because the natural instinct of virtually any leader, especially one trying to move fast, is to aggressively eliminate friction. You want to make meetings shorter, cut out the middleman, bypass the committees, and centralize the major decisions to just one or two really smart people in the room so the organization can just move.
And to be fair, eliminating friction works beautifully for a short period. It creates an incredible burst of efficiency. But relentlessly removing friction also systematically removes the organization's ability to self-correct.
You lose the warning signals.
Exactly. When you centralize decisions to avoid the annoyance of debate, you inevitably filter out vital information. You stop hearing the faint warning signals coming from the outer edges of the organization, where the reality of the market or the battlefield actually lives.
So how do we keep those warning signals alive without bogging everything down?
By explicitly institutionalizing dissent. Human confidence is a very dangerous thing. Unchecked individual confidence systematically misses its own blind spots.
We all think we're right.
We do.
Okay.
Enduring systems do not rely on the leader being right all the time. They force assumptions to be challenged by design. They mandate rigorous red team analysis for major operational plans. They assign mandatory contrarian roles at the close of significant strategy meetings.
So it's built into the schedule.
Yes. They structure the challenge so that catastrophic mistakes are caught in the safety of the boardroom, rather than exploding in the market or on the battlefield.
The manual also heavily emphasizes building redundancy into critical command roles. Every critical role identified on the authority map needs a designated, trained backup with documented, pre-cleared authority.
It's non-negotiable.
Because if your global supply chain completely stops functional because your lead logistics director gets a severe case of the flu, your system isn't lean, it is dangerously, recklessly centralized.
Precisely. And this ties directly back to how we integrate independent oversight while maintaining decisive operational speed. The secret lies in design principle, one separate execution from oversight.
Okay.
The golden rule of enduring architecture is that the person who executes the decision cannot, under any circumstances, be the person who reviews the risk of that decision.
This is the dual control principle we discussed earlier applied to the broader map.
Yes. And when those roles are explicitly clear, when everyone knows who is flying the plane and who is monitoring the weather, radar decisions actually accelerate.
Because you aren't second-guessing.
Right. Energy isn't lost to internal disorder, overlapping responsibilities, or toxic office politics. The executor executes with full confidence, knowing the auditor is watching the systemic risk.
I have to throw a flag here and push back on the reality of implementing this. I imagine a lot of executives hear the phrase mandatory contrarian rules and they immediately roll their eyes.
They do.
They think, great, this just means giving the office complainer a megaphone. We are going to sit in a room, the contrarian is going to play devil's advocate for 10 minutes just to check the box, everyone will ignore them, and then the CEO will do what they wanted to do anyway. How do we ensure institutional dissent is actually productive rather than just annoying and paralyzing?
That is the reality of poorly executed dissent. But what's fascinating here is that Durolari's version of structured dissent is not about empowering a difficult personality. It is entirely about enforcing a rigid process.
So it's not just the grumpy guy.
Right. You aren't asking the grumpy guy in the corner to just complain about the plan. You are creating a formal mechanism that protects organizational authority from slow erosion.
How does that look in practice?
You are looking at a senior vice president and saying, for the next 10 minutes, it is your formal operational duty to argue why this specific plan will fail, and you must build your argument using only objective data, not opinion.
Oh, that's entirely different.
It is. It forces the leader's assumptions to be tested against harsh reality in a safe, process-driven way. It completely removes the personal friction, the feeling of being attacked, and replaces it with highly valuable analytical friction.
Okay, I love the distinction of analytical fiction. It takes the emotion out of it. And that sounds great for a Tuesday afternoon at corporate headquarters when everything is relatively calm. But what happens when the building is literally on fire?
That's a different story.
Right. Doesn't the careful authority map, the dual control, and the 10 minutes of analytical friction just get thrown out the window during a genuine existential crisis?
They do, and frankly, they must. Which brings us to the profound paradox of crisis leadership and the deployment of emergency authority.
Okay.
During a genuine, fast-moving crisis, standard friction slows down survival. You do not have the luxury of convening a red team to debate the data when the ship is rapidly taking on water. Therefore, the rapid, aggressive concentration of power is absolutely necessary for survival.
You need someone to just take the wheel.
But, and this is a massive, critical but, the danger in a crisis isn't the decisive action itself. The true danger is permanent structural distortion.
What the manual refers to as authority inertia.
Exactly. Authority inertia is the deeply ingrained psychological tendency for immense power that was granted in exceptional, terrifying circumstances to persist long after the crisis is actually resolved, simply because the concentrated power becomes highly familiar, comfortable, and efficient for the leader wielding it.
The source material uses Abraham Lincoln as the prime historical example of navigating this paradox perfectly. During the darkest days of the American Civil War, Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus.
A huge expansion of power.
Yeah. He took on incredibly expanded, highly centralized executive authority powers well beyond standard peacetime limits in order to save the Union from total collapse.
He deliberately bypassed normal friction because national survival demanded immediate, unquestioned execution. But the genius of Lincoln's leadership was that he treated that extreme power as a temporary, deeply undesirable necessity.
You didn't want to keep it.
No. He predefined the scope of what he was doing, and he fully allowed the constitutional balance and friction to resume post-war. He did not let crisis power permanently rewrite the architecture of the republic.
So to define the scope and the expiration of emergency authority safely within our own organizations, the manual provides 3 unbreakable rules. Rule 1, predefine the emergency scope before the fire starts.
It is so critical.
You have to write down the explicit, objective conditions that trigger the activation of emergency powers, exactly who has the legal or operational right to authorize it, and crucially, what specific powers remain strictly off limits even while the building is burning.
Rule 2, define the duration. Emergency authority granted without a hard expiration date endures forever. You must fix specific timeframes, mandatory operational checkpoints, and strict high-hurdle renewal requirements if the crisis extends.
And Rule 3, require post-crisis review. This is a mandatory, unflinching, independent review of proportionality designed to restore the legitimacy of the standard system once the dust settles.
Because if you skip that post-crisis review, you slowly normalize the expansion of executive power. You teach the organization that the leader can essentially do whatever they want, bypass any map, and ignore any dissent, as long as they simply declare the current situation an emergency.
So emergency authority is basically like taking out a high-interest payday loan. Sometimes, if cash flow completely dries up, you absolutely need it to keep the doors of the business open through the weekend.
Yes, sometimes it's necessary.
But if you don't aggressively pay it back and return to your normal, disciplined operating budget, the literal second the crisis has passed, the compounding interest on that emergency loan will eventually bankrupt you entirely.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it. The compounding interest is the slow, silent erosion of your organization's structural integrity.
Okay, let's pivot to execution. All of these concepts, succession audits, identifying core levers, authority maps, institutional dissent, emergency limits, they're intellectually bulletproof. They make perfect sense.
In theory, yes.
But if I'm a listener sitting at my desk right now thinking, my organization is a mess of proximity, power, and dependency, how do I actually build this? We need the actual blueprint to install it.
Duralari doesn't leave us hanging. The manual outlines a rigorous four-phase implementation cycle specifically designed to safely transition any organization from its current, fragile, personality-driven operations into durable mapped systems.
Okay, walk us through the phases.
It begins with Phase 1, the structural audit. This phase is entirely about confronting reality and knowing exactly where you currently are. You run the succession sprint we discussed, you apply BLADE to recent decisions, and you plot your organization on the dependency curve.
You have to know the baseline.
You simply cannot draw a new map until you establish your exact starting coordinates.
Then we move to phase 2, authority mapping. This is where you define what the system actually is, rather than what people assume it is. You meticulously translate the informal who knows who distribution of power into explicit, written, binding architecture. You draft the templates, set the boundaries, and define the escalation paths.
Once the map is drawn, Phase 3 is embedding execution defaults. This phase is about making your standards truly structural. You establish the non-negotiable minimums of performance and process that hold true regardless of who happens to be sitting in the commander's chair or the CEO's office.
So the rules apply to everyone.
Exactly. You embed the dual control protocols and mandate the analytical friction.
And finally, phase 4, stress testing. You don't just build the machine and hope it works. You have to intentionally break the system on purpose to prove the map reflects reality.
And to make this actionable, Duralari gives us a highly concrete 90-day transition plan utilizing this four-phase cycle. This is incredibly relevant for military officers, perfectly mirroring the Air Force's 90-day pre-PCS continuity package requirements.
Why 90 days?
The genius of this timeline is that the outgoing commander completes this massive structural handover while still fully in command, allowing a full 30-day overlap for actual knowledge transfer and observation.
Let's give our listeners a simple template right now to track this progress over a quarter. Month 1 is entirely dedicated to audit and map. You run your 5-step succession sprint, you use BLADE to find your core lever, and you draft the initial authority map for every critical node.
Month 2 shifts to defaults and dissent. You officially embed your execution defaults into the operational tempo, you establish that vital dual control oversight for the core lever, and you formally define the scope and expiration triggers for emergency authority.
And month 3 is test and handover. You run intense simulation scenarios, you update the authority map based on the brutal reality of the after-action reviews, and you execute the final transfer of power.
Yes.
Now, the source points out that there are 3 major failure modes when organizations try to implement this cycle. And the absolute biggest one is that organizations constantly sabotage themselves by skipping phase 1 and phase 2 and jumping straight to phase 3 writing execution defaults. Why is that such a universal trap?
Because writing new rules feels incredibly productive. It feels like taking decisive action. It is very satisfying for a leadership team to sit in a conference room for 2 days and write a master list of perfect execution default.
It looks like real work.
It does. But writing rules for a system you haven't fundamentally audited or mapped means you are creating purely aspirational documents. They are completely disconnected from where authority actually lives in the hallways and Slack channels. You are essentially writing flawless laws for a country that doesn't actually exist.
You have to face the ugly reality of the map first. Only once the reality is mapped and the defaults are embedded in that reality do we hit phase 4. We have to stress test it, we have to put it in a wind tunnel and see what breaks.
The manual provides a suite of highly practical stress test scenarios designed specifically to identify the hidden weak points in your operational command chains.
What's a good example?
Let's look closely at Scenario B, sudden leadership departure. In this simulation, You intentionally remove the primary leader from the equation with absolutely no advance notice, and you give the organization a tight 48-hour response window to manage normal operations.
So how do you actually execute that safely? The CEO or the battalion commander just drops off the grid. No emails, no phone calls, no Slack messages.
Precisely.
Huh.
You confiscate their phone if you have to. The leader is completely sequestered. And during those 48 hours, you watch the architecture. When a major client demands a sudden concession at hour 4, who answers? When a PR issue surfaces at hour 12, does the VP of Communications have the authority map clearance to issue a statement, or do they freeze and panic?
This scenario explicitly measures the transition architecture under surprise conditions. Do the junior leaders actually know their boundaries, or do they paralyze? Does the redundancy pathway activate automatically, or does everyone just wait for the leader to return?
And then there is an even more aggressive test, Scenario D high-tempo transition. This is brutal. It's a leadership change simulated right in the middle of an active, high-stress, critical operation.
Oh man, during an operation.
The Scenario D is the definitive test of structural endurance. It measures whether your execution defaults and authority maps actually hold up under immense compound pressure, or if the moment things get difficult, everyone abandons the map, reverts to proximity power, and panics.
But the manual is clear. Running the simulation is only half the battle. If you just run the test and say, wow, that went terribly, you haven't fixed anything. You must execute a rigorous after-action review, the AAR.
Yes, and here we return directly to the BLADE protocol we discussed earlier. Running a complex stress test without a mandatory BLADE-structured AAR is worse than doing nothing at all.
Why?
Because it is simply confirming you have a massive structural problem and willfully leaving it in place. The AAR must result in two things: updating the authority map to reflect where the breakdown occurred, and assigning specific, named corrective actions with hard deadlines.
So what does this all mean? When you run Scenario B and the organization completely falls apart in 24 hours, people tend to get incredibly defensive. Egos are bruised, but a failed stress test isn't a failure of the people in the room. It's a vital exposure of the architecture. It's a feature of the test, not a bug in your team.
That is the exact mindset shift required. You want the system to break in the safety of the simulation so it holds firm in the unforgiving reality of the market.
Makes total sense.
And all of this intense structural preparation, the deep auditing, the meticulous mapping, the grueling stress testing, it all culminates in one final, deeply human act: the actual transfer of power.
The manual frames this final act beautifully through the concept of the mentor's letter. It asks us to adopt the perspective of a retiring, highly experienced commander drafting a private advisory letter to their incoming successor.
It's a powerful exercise.
If we were to draft the conceptual contents of this mentor letter today, detailing exactly how to transfer power safely and build lasting institutional strength without creating organizational instability, what are the core messages?
The mentor's letter is the ultimate distillation of institutionalizing authority. It must advise the incoming successor on three foundational principles. First, govern the core lever above all else. Your primary duty isn't to be liked. It is to protect the operational engine of the organization through strict dual control.
Right, second point.
Second, actively respect the input friction. Do not silence the structured dissent or bypass the red teams just because they are annoying or slow you down in the short term. They are your armor.
And the third?
And third, remember that your ultimate job as a leader is to slowly, methodically make yourself structurally unnecessary.
That's profound.
This raises an important question for everyone listening right now, regardless of your rank or title. If you were suddenly gone tomorrow, what exactly would your successor inherit?
Yeah, think about it.
Would they walk into a well-oiled, self-correcting machine with a clear authority map? Or would they inherit a fragile cult of personality with a deeply compressed team scrambling in the dark, desperately looking for direction?
If I am the incoming leader and I'm reading this mentor letter on my first day in the office, what is the absolute hardest ego pill I have to swallow about this entire transition process?
The hardest pill is accepting that your job isn't to be the hero. It's true. The organization does not need your radiant charisma to swoop in and save the day. If it does, the organization is broken. Your job is to submit your ego to the architecture, enforce the execution defaults relentlessly, and continue building the system so that the next person down the line can do the exact same thing seamlessly.
It's about pouring the concrete for the load-bearing columns, not polishing the glass on the chandelier.
Perfectly said.
To summarize our deep dive today, charisma is incredibly fragile. Structural authority is durable. By utilizing 90-minute succession audits, clearly defining decision rights through authority maps, embedding execution defaults, and running rigorous stress tests, leaders can transition their organizations from fragile, personality-driven dependencies into enduring, unstoppable systems.
The tools to build that endurance are right in front of you. The succession sprint, the BLADE protocol for after-action reviews, the 90-day transition plan. The true discipline of leadership is choosing to use those tools now before a crisis forces you to realize the columns are rotting.
My direct call to action for you today. The learner, pull up your own org chart this afternoon. Look closely at the neat lines and boxes and ask yourself honestly, where does the actual decision-making authority live? Is it on the paper, or is it entirely based on who has the best relationship with the boss? Find the gap, fix the map.
Fix the map.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your week, building on everything we've explored today. We spend our entire careers, our entire lives, really, trying to make ourselves totally indispensable. We fight tooth and nail to be the one person the organization simply cannot survive without.
We all do it.
But what if the ultimate measure of your greatness as a leader isn't how much the organization misses you when you're gone, but rather how flawlessly it forgets you are ever there?
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.
Until next time.